Welcome back to the Gem Cutter's Craft. Today we're going to be talking about the Wood Lap. The wood lap is not a lap that we are typically familiar with as modern cutters. Nobody really talks about wood laps, and until recently you couldn't even buy a wood lap. And the only reason I ever knew about wood laps is because of my interaction with some of the master cutters of England who still remember and still use wood laps from the days of old. But this has all changed in the last month when a brand new company, Wood Lap LLC, just debuted their website and announced that they're now selling various types of wood laps. So I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into the wood lap, talking to some of the people that use it, talking to the manufacturer, and also looking at some of the historical sources to understand how people have used wood laps in the past for the art of gem cutting. So when I first started looking into the wood lap, I already had one idea. I knew one off the top of my head, and I didn't think I was going to find very many references for the wood lap, especially in regards to faceting, but I was completely wrong. So in my research, I went all the way back to the medieval period, and I was delighted to find references to the wood lap. So if we go all the way back to the 8th century, there's a document called the Mappe Clavicula, and there is actually a reference to the wood lap. There's actually a few different documents that I found from this medieval period. Whether we're looking to the 8th century, the 12th century, the 13th century, or even the 16th century, there's a bunch of different references to the wood lap. So let's check out some of these and see what they tell us, see what they say. So the Mappe Clavicula mentions the wood lap for softer colors or softer stones and says they're used to polish the softer stones on a wooden table of alder, maple, willow, or similar species. Now when we get to Theophilus in 1120, he's telling us to polish soft stones, we're going to use goat skin on wood with ground tile and saliva. So get your goat skin out because these wood laps can take anything. Just kidding. We don't need goat skin for these, but let's see what else they tell us. Theophilus also tells us that for polishing hard stones, we can take a smooth board of lime wood with saliva and a fine emery powder, and he explains that very fine powder of crystal mixed with water can be used to polish gems as well. But in this case, instead of lead or goat skin, a board of linden wood should be used as a polishing surface. Now, if we go just a little bit more into the future, the Doctrina Poliendi says a copper lap for the harder stones and a wood lap for the softer stones, and they specifically mention alder, maple, willow, fig, and laurel. So a couple different types of laps that we're seeing here. Now, remember, when we're looking at these medieval sources, this is pre-faceting history for Europe. We do not have any faceting machines in Europe yet, so all of these references to the wood lap and polishing stones on wood is really just talking about cabochons and maybe carvings. Now, if we want to look at a more modern reference, an early modern reference, I found a dictionary from 1726 that also tells us about using a wood lap for cutting stones. So this is the Dictionary of the Arts and Sciences in 1728, and they tell us that the oriental ruby, sapphire, and topaz are cut on a copper wheel with diamond dust, tempered with olive oil, and are polished on another copper wheel with tripoli and water. The hyacinth, emerald, amethyst, garnets, agates, and other stones are cut on a lead wheel with emery and water, and polished on a tin wheel with tripoli. But the softest stones, turquoise, opals, girasol, are cut and polished on a wooden wheel with tripoli. We have some precedents here. The softer stones can be polished on a wooden wheel, and that might give us a fine polish, so they say. Let's look at a few more. Now, when we get into the 1800s, we come to John Maul, and this is the original reference that I knew that I could find some information about the wood lap because I had seen this in my previous researches about gem cutting in England. So John Maul has a whole section in his book, Familiar Lessons on Mineralogy and Geology, about the wood lap. So let's see what he has to say. The wood lap. The wood mill is worked with sand and water or flour emery. It is very serviceable in rendering the stone smooth, which prepares it for receiving a better polish. It is easily used and requires no further direction. For carnelians, agates, jasper, etc., worked on this lap will receive so fine a surface that they may be polished with great facility. The lap being light is also advisable to hoop it up with lead, which will make it work more agreeably and with greater ease. So carnelians, agates, and jaspers are great for the wood wheel so says John Maul. He also gives us another example of using the wood wheel in a slightly different way in a section that he calls the list mill. Now, if you look up the word list, today it doesn't really mean what it used to mean back in the 1820s. In the 1820s, one of the definitions of list is essentially selvage cotton or denim. So this is, you hear about selvage denim jeans. This is selvage material, cotton, that we would put on top of wood and get another type of wood lap polishing. So in this section, he says, the wheel is covered with list and used to give the finishing polish to rounded stones, such as tallow drop work, as brooch stones, tops of boxes, carnelian drops, coral drops, etc. It's also useful in polishing shells, particularly as have an uneven surface. It is used wet with tin oxide. A morsel of sponge tied to a stick will serve to supply the water, and the putty may be applied by a common tin pepper box. First, moisten the list, and then sprinkle it with putty, which must not be too wet. The mill should be turned with a quick motion, and the substance will soon receive the highest polish it is capable of. So we can use the wood alone, or we can use it with selvage on top, this sort of rough cotton, and give us another way of using the wood lap. So we see the wood lap being used in the 1800s. The cutters in Idar Oberstein had wood laps. When we get into the 1900s, I found tons of references to the wood lap. First being G.F. Herbert Smith in 1912 in his book Gemstones. He mentions that wood laps are one of the options, and you can also use leather on top of the wood for polishing. He says, as a general rule, the harder the stone, the greater the speed of the lap. Now, when we get to the 1930s, this is J. Harry Howard. This is really the beginning of the American gem cutting scene, and Howard tells us that wood laps are an option, but he's really talking about using them for cabochons. We haven't really heard anyone talking about using the wood lap to actually polish facet a stone. Now, when we get into the 1950s, we have an article from Johnson Kankis. It's an article about polishing, and he has a section called Wood Lap for Jade. He tells us, a fine piece of New Zealand nephrite came to my hand a short time ago, and as is my custom, I prepared a large cab from it. Everything proceeded well up to the final polish, which was done on moist leather with chrome. Work as I would, the polish still left numerous patches of frost here and there over the crown. Accordingly, I took the cab and finished it up on a hard maple lap impregnated with tin oxide. This left a fine sparkly finish which glistens like agate. For minerals with a fibrous structure and those allied to the amphiboles and pyroxenes, wood seems unusually effective in producing a perfect polish. Lindy A is a suitable alternative medium in lieu of tin oxide. And we see a bunch of other cutters in the 1950s and 60s referencing the tin lap. We've got Sukup in his iconic faceting handbook, that little pamphlet. We've got Whitlock in 1956 in his Stories of the Gems. We see it in lapidary journal articles and gems and gemology articles talking about using it for polishing girdles, for polishing tables, for polishing cabs. We've got a lot of evidence here all the way up until the 1980s and 1990s for using the wood lap. The last one I want to cite here is from Michael Gray. This is 1988, Faceting Large Gemstones. He says, as with almost any polishing procedure, it's up to the cutter to evaluate the attributes of the various methods available to determine which to use for the stone at hand. For example, a wood lap used with the desired polishing compound will shorten the time required to polish most large facets. This lap, suggested to the author by Johnson Kankis, can easily be made from ordinary hardwood plywood found as sheets at the lumber yard. It polishes most materials in less than half the time as any other laps. However, this same lap usually leaves the facets slightly rounded and accentuates twinning planes in the material. Polishing the stone as a two-step process on a combination of laps requires less time than a single polishing on the better lap because one combines the best properties of two, in this case, the speed of the wood lap and the fine polish of the tin lap. Wood laps can be used on soft stones, those materials that have a hardness less than 7, as long as the cutter is aware that heat can build up in the stone at the point of polishing and takes proper procedures to keep the stone from fracturing because of this heat. We've got a lot of different pieces of evidence about the wood lap, from the medieval times to Renaissance times to modern times, all the way up until today. So let's talk to a cutter in England, my friend Ken Harrington, who was the first person to introduce me to the wood lap, and see what he has to say.
My name's Kenneth Harrington. I started at Matthews at the age of 14. Firstly, we're going pre-1960. The way we smoothed up cabochons was on a wood wheel with grooves across the wood wheel and flour emery driven with a hand bench. And you use water and you smooth your cab up. because the contour was already there. It was a flat wood lap with curves in it. So you put the cabochon in and smooth it round. That was the theory. Well, the wood wheel that they used was pine and had the same grooves in it for diamond powder. You put your diamond powder on the grooves and then you worked really hard at it, which is not what it's about. I was sitting next to Mr. Woodcock, and Mr. Woodcock was fusing floors all the time. To fuse the floor, you have to have it in the right direction. So you have to be very accurate as to where you aim and hit. So you have to be extremely accurate where you're actually placing it on the wheel. The old system of grooves didn't work. So I started to experiment with all different woods. I experimented over 10 years before I found mahogany, old mahogany, without any resin in it. I had to get it really smooth, and I found that I could hit directly onto the floor from any direction I wanted to with a flat wheel and very smooth. But it was also very fast. I did a very, very big star ruby, which I had to fuse all the floors up in. I mean, a couple of inches across. This was for Mr. Matthews. So on that wheel, I was able to fuse all the floors. I got double wages. Only ever time in history. The wood wheel, yeah, it's mahogany, old mahogany, as I call it. You know, it was without resin in it. It doesn't matter if it's new, but if it's got resin in, the diamond powder sticks to the resin.
By resin, you're talking about the wood filler that the lumber manufacturers put into it.
Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't know that. All I know is resin in the wood with new wood that I had. So I had to find old wood, old mahogany tables, anything. Well, if you've got soft stones like fire opals, all types of cabochons. All types of cabochons. It doesn't matter how soft they are, how hard they are. Wood wheel with 0-5 or 3/4-1 diamond powder glazes them. That's what I'm trying to get across. It's not a grinding process, it's a glazing process. With the mahogany smooth and diamond powder, you're pulling the stone in, but the surface actually moves. It actually glazes the stone over. If it's like an opal or lapis lazuli or fluorospar or something like that, you use 3/4 on the wood wheel rather than an 0-5. But it glazes, it gives such a high polish. Everyone remarks, if even on an opal, gloss on it is incredibly high, and that's off the wood wheel. With the wood wheel, you just put the stone on, twiddle it around, it's done. On the odd occasional facet on a fire opal that wouldn't polish, yes, I've placed it by hand on the wood wheel to get it polished and then carry on. I would really like a flat one to be able to put facets on. When you're using wood lap, it's got to be smooth. You're using 3/4-1 or 0-5. You're glazing. You're not grinding. You're actually glazing the stone. The surface moves just for a fraction of a second, but it's moving. So if you're polishing with facets, which is why I'm excited about it, because I've always wanted to do that. So you've got to cut them on first. But if you polish them on the wood, should be no problems. I tried using lignum vitis. I tried using oak, all those. It's not the same. Mahogany is the one that, that took me 10 years to discover that. Not 2 minutes. It was a whole road to travel.
So now that we've heard from Ken, I think we should go directly to the source. Let's go over to Noah, the manufacturer and owner of Wood Lap LLC, and see what he has to say about using the Wood Lap.
So I'm Noah. I'm based out of Indianapolis, and I've been fasting for about 2 years. Wood Lap kind of started talking to a few people, learning that wood could be used to polish gemstones, but had been historically used more by hand and not necessarily on a lot of modern faceting machines. So I've been fasting for about 2 years, and polishing was something I struggled to get a good handle over. And once I had started on just a plain white wood lap that we made in the garage on some simple material, we found just a lot of success on our first few projects. And we started testing all different kinds of varieties of wood, found that most of them are quite effective with lots of different polishes and create a really beautiful effect on gemstones, curving the facets a bit more than a lot of standard polishing discs, but creating a lot of versatility when it comes to working with gemstones. Mahogany, which is definitely our best seller so far, has tremendous qualities and grain patterns that work well while you're faceting. And then some specialty laps like the Purple Heartwood that are very effective, but also have some visual appeal as well. I work with all of our different types, so I bounce back and forth But what I've recommended is, resurfacing is super easy. So you can really have a lap that you've charged a certain way and kind of adjust it and work with the same lap. But they're also double-sided. So, you can work with a finer grit on the inside and work your way outside utilizing the same side. Or you can also just flip the lap. And resurfacing is just a few strokes with a medium or fine grit sandpaper. And so contamination and charging is really simplified with these. So that also guided our decision making. What could we get that was both effective and sustainable? And so we have hard, dense woods like the Aframosia, the purple heartwood, oak, walnut, and the mahogany, all of which are very dense and will last kind of with impact over time. The one softwood that we offer is the cedar lap. That's our introductory lap. And it still provides a fantastic finish. Since it is softer, what you notice is that you push the stone a little bit further and those edges become a little bit more rounded, which I think can provide a lot of versatility, but you have to resurface a bit more just because it's softer, you impress a bit more. But our oak, our mahogany, our Aframosia, they hold up to that pressure over time and provide definitely a very long-lasting tool. For people who don't work with wood a lot, I feel like a lot of gem cutters are very weary of working with wood or leather or other natural materials. But it's designed to work in tandem. You're working with a really hard stone and kind of having something that has tension, but will also give a little. You see the effect of it, that the center of whatever pressure you're putting is going to be the last one to get polished. When you're polishing, you don't really see that straight up and down or the straight line that you see with standard ceramic or metallic polishing laps, but you more see kind of a fade as the polish is coming out, and it's very satisfying. I've really fallen in love with polishing, which is hard to do sometimes when you're just struggling with a certain material or a certain facet. These are the tool. Even if you just pull it out of your back pocket for that one facet, you'll thank yourself. Standard lap oil, WD-40 with proper safety equipment are very effective. As far as cleaning as well, just simple mineral spirits are a great material just to run across the surface, get any excess compounds or the oil out after you use it. It keeps it nice and stable. I recommend that people clean them just to keep a nice consistent tool that you're using over time, just to keep it properly maintained. But most of my laps, I know I dressed it with 100-carat diamond powder or some cerium oxide, and I kind of just rehydrate it with the lubricant I'm using. Whether people use it to tallow the table, whether people use them to polish every single facet and the girdle, you see a vibrant stone afterwards, and you see light move across each facet from the crown on the surface when you look in the stone as it refracts from the pavilion. I mean, it's remarkable, and I think everybody has their own taste. But to change the appearance subtly, but so effectively and consistently, and if you get the hang of it, you can really accomplish incredible meat points that just blow your mind. But with a little bit of experience, it provides a stunning effect. It makes like juicy stones look even juicier. I've combined them, especially in the early days, like using a bat lap, using an ultra lap in tandem, or even a before and after. And you can create really interesting, like flat, but then curved right at the edge, or fully curved up against a flat facet. And I think once there's a bit more knowledge around using them, I think it will open the doors for a lot of cutters to create really exceptional pieces. But there's also, when you search the internet for any wood laps that you can get for a faceting machine, it's like you said, you're buying from somebody who's been using the same one. To get a freshly milled and kiln dried top quality lumber that you can get whenever you want and will fit your machine and is customizable, it's exciting, and there's the history to kind of back up the science enough to really get this in people's hands. The supplier that we use has been a staple in Indianapolis for over 50 years. They don't use any resins in their raw wood. It's freshly milled. We use African mahogany, which is more sustainable. It doesn't grow in the Amazon. It grows in more rich soils and big trees. So in furniture and pieces with more exotic woods, you'll find a lot of resins, but we work with freshly milled wood, no resins that you'll find.
Now, I just received my brand new Mahogany Lap from Noah at Wood Lap LLC, and I've dressed mine, as you can see, in the two-step rings that I like to do with all of my laps. So I went ahead and did a test stone. I first cut it, polished it on my jam peg, and then I wanted to do the tallow top table. So this is what Ken was talking about, the convex table. So I hand cut my stone in on my centered 600 lap, and then I went straight to my old wood lap. So this is my old mahogany lap that Ken was talking about, and he gave this to me. This is an old one, and it's very wobbly and rickety and old, which is why they were getting rid of it. So I did my original tallow top on this lap, but it didn't come out that great. I didn't do the original dressing on this, and it's got a lot of different grits all mixed together. So I wasn't really able to get a great finish. It looks nice without the loop, but when you look closely with the loop, it's very marred and has all kinds of dents and dings in it. So I went back this morning and did the whole thing again with the outer ring of 0 to 5 microns and the inner ring of 0 to 1 microns. This is the exact same setup that I use on all of my polishing laps, whether that be copper, tin, lead, or whatever. So now I've got the mahogany lap in my arsenal, and wow, it did such a beautiful job. I was able to quickly take out all of the dents and dings out of that table, hand round it again, and then go to the 0-1 on the inner ring, and it did wonders. So this is my first experience with this new wood lap from Wood Lap LLC, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm gonna try and see what I can do. Spinning the girdles on here, and even as Noah said, try and polish the facets and give it a little bit of a convex look and see what that might do to my finished stone. I have an idea that it's gonna make the stones look more glossy, more gemmy, more juicy, more candy-like, and for me, that's something that I really look for in my stones. I'm not necessarily the proponent of getting the perfect flat facets, because I think that they do actually look a little bit softer and sweeter with a rounder look. And that's something that I want to experiment with a little bit more, and this wood lap is definitely the way that I'm going to try and do that. So what do you think about the wood lap? Is this something that you'd like to try? Put a note in the comments and tell me what you think. I'd love to hear your opinions on the wood lap. Maybe you've tried one before, maybe you've made one yourself, maybe you've never even heard of a wood lap, so I'd love to hear what you have to say. Now, just in closing, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this video, and if this is useful to you, or any of my other videos have been useful for you or inspiring, I invite you to support me over on Patreon. This is a small monthly donation that helps keep these videos free and coming. So this has been Justin K. Prim with the Gem Cutter's Craft, and I'll see you right here next time, whether that's on Patreon or YouTube. See you then.